Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of the HR Tech Chat video podcast. And with me today, I have Michael Spataro, who is Chief Delivery Officer for Legion. And Legion is a provider of workforce management solutions, advanced technologies for it. Thank you for joining us, Michael.
Thanks for having me. I think one of our primary mission, the primary mission at Legion is to improve the lives of hourly workers and make hourly jobs great jobs.
Oh, I love that. I love that tagline. You're singing every hourly worker's song right there with that, aren't you?
Yeah, it's a new world if you really think about the dynamic of power, right? It's shifted from the employer to the employee, and all of us have to solely focus on really building back loyalty between the employee and the employer, and we have to do that in a really meaningful way.
Oh, I love that. And that shift in power is And I know we want to talk about the Great Resignation. I'm chomping at the bit right now, but in a bigger sense, that power has shifted in many ways, not just from the worker to the worker from the employer, but also to the candidate from the hiring organization. There seems to be this dispersing of the power away from the central area.
Yeah, no, there is. It started with certainly a global pandemic, which affected the lives of everyone. Hourly workers continued to work, and in some cases worked throughout a pandemic. In other cases were furloughed or laid off, and they didn't really feel like they were maybe as valued pre-pandemic as they felt they should have been, right? And now they're demanding that. And the overall challenge that we have, there's this perception of this shortage of workers, and the reality is there's not a shortage of workers. There's a shortage of people that want to do these types of jobs. Yeah. 9 million people didn't just disappear. Those 9 million people are still in the workforce. They're just not applying for or staying with retail or hospitality customers. And we need them. We need them more today than ever before, because the experience that every employer is going through is unpredictable, right? There's this kind of perception of a year of volatility. Really, no one has a crystal ball to say, here's where we are today and here's where we're going to end up. There's a perception that the pandemic goes over, and now we have Omicron, so now there's the pandemic maybe isn't over, and how is that going to continue to affect our lives? We have logistics issues with getting products to stores. So there really is a need to build back that employee loyalty, and that's broader than just paying people higher wages.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Paying them more obviously is a piece of the puzzle, but it's definitely not a silver bullet. It's not the answer. It's not the go-to thing to do every time. And I guess my question to you is, given this great resignation, this perceived labor shortage, which is really just a shortage of people who want to do some of these jobs that have maybe just been thankless or have had poor scheduling options or poor pay, let's be frank. What are some of the things that organizations can do to attract more employees for these types of jobs and retain them?
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? It is about how do I retain the people I have, but then it is about how do I attract the people that I need. Retaining the people that you have is broader than just paying them more money, right? So if you think about a living wage, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of discussion around, paying employees a living wage. And the government was exploring a $15 an hour minimum wage. And many of the people that fought against a $15 hour minimum wage were employers. And those same employers are now, paying employees $19 and $20 and $25 an hour. but it's broader than just paying them enough money. They have to have, they want to be able to interact with their employer in the same way they interact with every other individual and company in their life, right? So it's important to have technology that enables them to interact with their employer in the same way they order clothes from Amazon or communicate with their friends, right? So advanced technologies are critical. They also want flexibility, right? They want the flexibility in their schedule to ensure that they can create the right work-life balance for them. So you look at some employers which would have previously had a higher full-time mix of, a higher part-time mix, a lower full-time mix. Those employers are now looking at having a higher full-time mix so they can give those employees the hours that they want, so they don't have to work 3 jobs to put food on the table. And also giving them the flexibility, in many cases, enabling employees to create their own schedule, swap shifts when they want, pick up open shifts that they want. It gives the employee the flexibility they need, but it also gives the employer the ability to meet their resource needs as it relates to meeting the customer demand, because employee flexibility doesn't mean every employee wants to work Monday through Thursday and have nights and weekends off. That might be a bad schedule for me, but it might be a great schedule for you. So giving them that flexibility gives you broader coverage. And then you're also looking at benefits, right? What benefits are we providing these employees? In the past, we tried to keep them below the minimum number of hours in which they can get benefits. Now we're engaging them and giving them more hours so that they can get the benefits, so that they can feel like they're valued in a more meaningful way in their workplace.
Yeah. What I'm getting from this is employees getting the sense that the employer actually cares about them in any way, shape, or beyond what's your time, what can you give me for your time, and that's I think that is very important. There's been this sort of I would say a paradigm. I hate the word paradigm shift, but it's true. It's happening where organizations are just they're beginning to recognize that this employee-employer relationship, or this relationship between us and the people who do the work for us, because sometimes they're contractors too, right? It's not a pure exchange of mental or physical labor for remuneration. It's a lot more than that. Workers are there at their jobs for significant portions of their life, and they would prefer for it not to suck that percentage of their life. I get it. One of the things that's interesting also that you brought up, and a lot of people, you and I, we're in the HCM industry, so we're very close to the conversation, and we see, I think, sort of we hear the bleeding edge of the conversation more than others do. But there's a lot, in our bubble, if you will, there's a lot of talk about how, hey, employee engagement, keeping employee sentiment up, morale high. It's more to do with just having a great performance review. It can be as this might not be the right word, but as mechanical as making your scheduling software more accessible, easier to use, more mobile friendly, these sorts of things. But it absolutely is that. It's workforce management. And in fact, if you think about it, this whole push to improve employee sentiment, or improve how the employee feels about their job, actually there is no more logical place than for it to originate in workforce management.
Yeah, I think that employees today need to feel that their employer values them in a multidimensional way. We conducted a study of both managers and employees. We surveyed 500 hourly employees and 500 managers, and we looked at what are the top reasons that these employees were not interested in staying at their employer, or would leave their jobs other than pay. And there were 3 interesting facts that it was about the lack of scheduling empowerment. So how am I engaged in that scheduling process, and what flexibility do I have to ensure that I have a schedule that really meets my need. The second aspect was poor communication. So if you think about retailers historically, no retailer wanted every hourly employee to have an email address so that the employer can communicate with the employee, nor did the employee have the ability to communicate effectively with not only the people in their store, but the management in their store, their field management and corporate. So the other reason these employees said they would leave their job is poor communication. And the third reason was interesting, but not surprising when you think about hourly workers, their inability to get paid early. So how do I get paid in real time? How do I do a job today and get paid tonight? And a lot of that was about employees wanting to be able to react to, emergencies that happen in their life. They have the car broke down and I need to fix the car, and I have two options. I wait till my next paycheck and the car stays in the shop until my next paycheck, but I need the car to get back and forth to work. So how do I get access to pay more rapidly? And it is a trend that is, that really is taking hold in retail. And these are things that retailers really need to be mindful of as it relates to why are those employees leaving, and then how do we give them what they need in order to feel valued and feel empowered and feel like they're important to that employer. On the flip side of that, right, we spoke to 500 managers and we asked them the same question, and they came back with an interesting set of responses. They wanted their employer to provide them with tools that made it easier for them to communicate with their employees. They wanted to reduce the amount of time spent on administrative tasks, and they also wanted to get paid earlier. So it was just really interesting that if you really look at the two sides of the coin in that scenario, it's about giving the employees the flexibility, but it's also about giving managers tools that enable them to spend less time on administrative tasks and more times coaching and developing their employees and servicing their customers.
Yeah. What I find interesting about it too is that there two of the three are common denominators between the two groups. Yeah. I love that term, scheduling empowerment, as opposed to flexibility, right? Because it is flexibility, but it's more than that. It's going back to that shift in power as well. The technology has evolved to the point where it really is inexcusable, I think, at this point for an organization not to have a technology in place that gives their hourly employees that level of control or power over their own schedule. I mean, obviously, the organization has its needs, and at the end of the day, there has to be some give and take, right? But to give those employees that much power over their schedules it's becoming table stakes. Another thing that's becoming table stakes, you mentioned getting paid when they need to, streaming pay. That is another table stakes item. And then when you talk about the other terms, just kind of analyzing these, for the managers, less administrative tasks. I mean, that's about having a modern time and attendance and scheduling system in place, workforce management system in place, so that they're, some of that just tedium is automated, right? And you want to talk about AI assisted scheduling, then you're talking about higher level automation, right? Even less administrative work. What I would be interested in, what do managers consider to be administrative work? I mean, it's probably higher level than just sort of this rote repetitive stuff.
Let me talk about a couple of things. So, as it relates to schedule empowerment or employee engagement, which are buzzwords today, you have to take that down a level. So there's a customer of ours, Phil's Coffee, who runs coffee shops in the Pacific Northwest. And they market to their employees about what scheduling empowerment means or what employee engagement means. So the ability to create your own schedule, the ability to have the flexibility, the ability to swap shifts, pick up open shifts as you need. Are things that they're marketing to their employees that will make them employer of choice. So you have to take the employee empowerment and the employee engagement and bring it down to really what does that mean? And if you really bring it down to what does that mean to the employee, it is exciting for them, right? The ability for them to create the schedule that they want, the ability for them to swap shifts when they want with who they want, the ability for them to pick up shifts when they have the time to pick up shifts. You've got to break it down to that lower level of detail. You can't just say it's about employee engagement or employee empowerment. You have to break it down. The other aspect of that is, I agree with you. You know, if you think about management in stores and in hospitality in the past, they did spend hours creating and managing schedules and time. And with advanced technologies, the ability for us to eliminate routine tasks, automate recurring tasks, such that you leverage machine learning to derive, right? Machine learning in its infinite use within forecasting gives us the ability to more accurately predict the store's future than a store manager or a finance group at corporate. So if we can more accurately predict that labor, we have the right set of labor standards to derive the right amount of labor and distribute that labor to where it needs to be. And then we're going to create the most optimal schedule. What we really need to help employers recognize is that schedule, you should be able to post that with minimal edits. And if you're going to make edits, machine learning and artificial intelligence should be able to recognize good edits from bad edits. And when it creates a schedule in the future, right, don't create the same shift that had been edited in the past, because by now creating a different shift, you're improving the overall schedule effectiveness. If we can, you know, if you look at one of the top reasons employee managers are leaving their jobs, right? They want to reduce the administrative burden. Yeah. With advanced technologies, you can create the perfect forecast. You can create the right amount of labor and distribute it as needed. You can create the most optimal schedule, so a manager can simply post that schedule. Then leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning, somebody calls out, the application, right, should automatically be seeing that, right, I'm changing that schedule, employee shift to out of location, you know, we're changing the pay code to sick or PTO, and the application does all the rest of the work, right? It identifies who can fill that shift. It sends out communication about filling that shift. The employee says, I'll take that shift. It simply notifies the manager that, right, somebody else is coming in instead of the employee that called out sick. That is real. And managers are looking for that capability. So we really have to help employers understand that it no longer takes hours to create and manage schedules in time. You can do it almost completely unassisted.
You know, one of the things that strikes me about this is you're helping the manager be a leader, not a manager, because there's nothing that screams manager to me more than spending, you know, who knows how many hours in front of the computer just figuring out the schedule. You know, I mean, that's very, very managerial. If you want to think of managerial as sort of narrow scope, not necessarily leadership, you know, you are sparing them all of that time so that they can actually be an inspiration or whatever it is they are to their workforce. That's one thing that really strikes me.
No, it is. And right, you can look at it one of two ways. You can look at it one way, which says, okay, that manager is going to be able to spend more time with my employees and my customers, thereby growing the opportunity for me to capitalize on that shopper, which is critically important today because, you know, e-commerce has grown about 10 years in the last 24 months. As people have become more comfortable with e-commerce. So it's more important for the retailer to have the right focus on the customer, to create the right experience for that customer so that they do come back and they do shop longer in their stores. But you also want to look at it on the flip side. you're not only developing that employee by giving that manager the ability to spend more time with that employee and your customer, you're also developing that manager. Right now, you're going to have to make sure that that manager has the skills to be training and developing your employees, coaching your employees on how they can be better at their job. So we're actually creating an environment that grows the skills and competence of our leadership within the store, as well as grows the skills and competence of our hourly employees that are working in the store, which given both of those opportunities, gives you the ability to look long term as your business does grow and evolve. These individuals that are working in your store, whether they're hourly or managers, have the capability to grow with your organization. Mm-hmm. And by giving these types of experiences, these are experiences that administrative tasks took away from your leadership.
Yeah. One thing I recall learning about earlier in my career is this idea of the service profit chain. And it was a term that came out in Harvard Business Review many years ago. And it's this idea that it's funny that they actually had to kind of, lay it out because it's so intuitive. But the idea is that the happier your floor associates are in the retail space and in similar environments, the happier or more engaged your customers are going to be, the more likely they are to return. You speak about employee engagement. What does it mean? It's a question that's crossed my mind too. It became this buzzword, and not that it's meaningless, but what does it actually mean? Well, if you have employees engaging with their schedule, actually engaging with each other, that's literally employee engagement, right? And the more power that you give them over this, the happier they're going to be with their schedule, the less likely they are to not want to show up for their shift because it's during a time that they were expecting it and that they're okay with it. And all these little things add up in aggregate to a better customer experience. And you mentioned, the explosive growth in e-commerce, especially over the last 2 years. It's grown 10 years worth. I think you said something like that. And you're absolutely right. That means if you're a retailer whose business model is particularly reliant upon the in-person experience, you better be sure that your hourly employees, your floor associates, are very, very happy with the basics of their job.
Yeah, and it goes back to stop thinking that it's just paying somebody more money, right? It is about, why not create a career opportunity for them, right? Can that hourly worker actually have a career with you as an employer? One would hope the answer to that is yes, and one would hope that you're giving them that opportunity. I think what another interesting aspect of all of this is, historically, the technology associated with workforce management was an operations-driven initiative, right? So if you were looking at the buyer for workforce management solutions historically, it was always operations, and maybe the HR function got involved in the product, but it wasn't necessarily something that was critically important or mission critical to them. I started this talk with talking a little bit about what our vision and mission is here at Legion. And it is about making hourly jobs great jobs, improving the lives of hourly workers. And I know that sounds somewhat cliche, but I'll have this conversation with every retailer. If that's not your mission, then you're going to continue to struggle in a meaningful way. And I think you're now starting to see HR executives become more involved in the WFM process, because it's becoming critically important for them to be able to make sure we're hiring the right people and we're retaining the people that are on staff. And workforce management is critical to ensuring that. So you're now seeing CHROs take much more an active role in workforce management, vendor selections, and solutions, because people have become so much more critical.
What's interesting is that one of our themes for 2022 here in 360 Insights, HCM themes, is a time to bring HCM out of the back office and onto the front lines, right? And I think that's interesting. But what you're describing there is the inverse of that, right? Is bringing something, is time to bring WFM to the HR office, and not necessarily, well, it would stay on the front. I'm tortured. This analogy is a little bit tortured here, but it just made me it reminded me of one of the themes, and how this is a little bit of the inverse of that. You're talking about scheduling. Obviously, it makes sense to be an operations related thing, because it's right where managers interact with their employees on a regular basis, right? But at the same time, the employee experience is such a concern, and it's a real aspirational stretch goal for the HR department to be very much involved in that, in ensuring the absolute the caliber of that employee experience. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, that's super interesting. You mentioned,
Yeah, the other thing I would
go
say
ahead.
is the the fascination with advanced technologies has never been more critical than it is today, right? From an organizational perspective, that old adage that says "evolve or die," right? We're in that right now, right? Every retailer needs to think about how are they evolving with the customer, how are they evolving with their employees' needs to be recognized and valued in a more meaningful way, how are they evolving in providing the right experience for their customers such that they can begin to build back that loyalty. When, pre-pandemic, when you talked about artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics, I think most retailers believe that that is in their future, but it's 5 or 10 years away. During the pandemic, we saw a very interesting fact. Many retailers didn't have contactless payment before the pandemic started, and when stores closed down, in many states, the only way they can open is if they provided contactless payment. So within a 3-month period, many retailers had to figure out how they accepted contactless payment, and they did it. So this new concept of COVID speed, they did it because they had to, and the bureaucracy associated with projects of scale wasn't there because, right, they had to accelerate the acceptance and the implementation of this advanced technology. So coming out of the pandemic, it is critically important that you're looking at technologies that are taking advantage of machine learning and artificial intelligence and robotics. They're a part of our life. There is no forecasting tool that doesn't have machine learning that can accurately predict a forecast that's based on history from the last 2 years, because we are in a year of volatility, but we also came from 2 years of volatility and fits and starts and roller coaster revenue opportunities. If you look back and try and create an actual sales forecast based on that history, it's never going to be accurate unless you use machine learning that can really look at all of that volatility and make sense of it and accurately predict your future. So many retailers are now saying, right, I can't pursue solutions that don't have these types of advanced technologies, because if it is important for me to reduce the administrative burden on managers, I need these types of technologies to make that happen. And they're adopting those technologies and more interested in those technologies than they've ever been before, or they need to be, because, right, that perception of evolve or die, if you don't make these types of commitments, your future is uncertain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking back in the past 2 years, yep, just reiterating what you said, but there's no way to create an accurate, a useful schedule for next week based on a immediate 2-year sort of retrospective, right? And then if you go back further, excuse me, well, that's great, but that's assuming that the future is going to look a lot like it did 2 years before the immediate 2-year past.
Yeah.
What's also interesting is about, just, you've probably heard this before, but a lot of people hear, machine learning, artificial intelligence is running the schedule. That sounds scary. That sounds inhuman. It sounds like it's just not going to be, but in practice, I think we've all been very Yeah, I think a lot of lay people have probably been pleasantly surprised that it actually makes schedules much more human by taking the humans out of creating it, which is kind of interesting. Two
Well,
things. Yeah.
I've said this before, machine learning is not a new concept. Machine learning has been around for eons. The difference is machine learning in the past was, a finance department at a retailer that was using spreadsheets and data to draw some conclusions about a forecast. The difference today is the processing power, right? Machines can process billions and billions and billions of lines of data in milliseconds to draw a conclusion that in the past would have taken us weeks and months, and in some cases years, to come to that same type of conclusion. And the reality is, whether you recognize it or not, machine learning and artificial intelligence have been part of our lives for a really long time. Amazon doesn't predict what you want to buy just by guessing, right? It's using advanced technologies to make some of those decisions. When you think about employees and their expectations of their employers as it relates to technology, those employees expect to have commercial technology solutions like they interact with every day. And a lot of those solutions that they interact with every day leverage this type of technology today. It's part of our lives, and it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Two things I want to touch on here. We're closing in on time here, but two things. One, Generation Z. I've heard them called Zoomers. I like the term. They play into this, and there's some sort of, I think some particularly important factors to remember when retailers and these types of employers are dealing with them. And then the other is communication. What types of the modes of communication that the hourly employees prefer or are most amenable to or can even handle. What if we can touch on those two, that would be great.
Yep. So, I think when you look at, Generation Z, like if we think about the advent of technology and how technology has grown in all of our lives, it's grown rapidly, nowhere near as rapid as it is growing today and going to continue to grow. They have an expectation that their work experience is going to be very consistent with their day-to-day experiences. And if they can't find that in an employer, they will seek other employment until they find that opportunity. They're, not unlike, millennials to some extent, where they want to be challenged in their job, and they don't necessarily want to do the same job forever, right? They want to continue to grow and develop. And again, if we look back at what is needed in today's world, what managers are looking for, what employees are looking for, if we can take the administrative burden out of the manager's hands so that they can spend more times with their employees to grow and develop them and evolve them within their career, and however long that career is with that retailer, that's what they're looking for. So that is critically important as we continue to look at what constitutes the demographic makeup of our employee base. And in some environments, you're going to have, baby boomers, millennials, and Gen Z all in the same environment. And we're going to have to be able to adapt to how we grow and develop and train them. And it's not going to be all with the same approach.
Yeah, yeah. As a Generation Xer myself, it's interesting. It's very difficult to really fathom the Generation Z mindset, because they truly are the first generation that grew up from infancy with the entire sort of, what we would call the modern communication, internet setup, right? There was no, even with millennials, they could be as old as 10 years old and remember, a time before there was really email or anything like that, right? So it's very interesting. As Generation X, we're the first that had, we're fully sentient, like teenagers without any of this, and also relatively young in the workforce, when all this stuff really exploded. So it's very difficult to fathom what it's like for Generation Z. But I think you're right. And just to put a fine point on it, it's really, I think it's very tough to underestimate the excuse me, to overestimate the impact that technological landscape has had on the overall, attitude and just mindset of the younger generations. And
Well, it's interesting because when I think about the real, like, access to pay sooner than my paycheck, unfortunately, there is some generational impact on retailers' ability to make that investment, and sort of that the way you see that happening is, when we're meeting with retailers and talking about instant pay, there's a real struggle as to, do I really have to do this? Does this really make sense? Do employees really need access to their money? Yes, those employees, like, we have to get out of our own mindset and put ourselves in the mindset of an hourly worker that is living paycheck to paycheck, and they might need that money to buy groceries. They might need that money to fix their car. And we need to have more empathy, and we need to be able to recognize that that's the diversity of our employee base. And I firmly believe that retailers are going to have to make that investment in instant pay, and that is going to become very commonplace in the next 12 to 24 months.
Oh, you're absolutely right, and we are running out of time, but I just wanted to mention quickly. You heard it here first. We'll be blogging about this general topic, what we're calling the Great Reconsideration, and it's this idea that all sorts of there is all sorts of sort of infrastructure in place right now, a lot of sunk cost in workflow that's going away. Whether it's payroll, predicated on the idea that it's definitely going to be every 2 weeks and monthly if you're talking worldwide, or it's some other thing. For instance, what was it, Amazon, excuse me, buy now, pay later, all these types of it, where it's just immediacy, this real flexibility, and all of this. These are just complete sort of just workflows that are going away. Because of because technology is enabling sort of this next generation of stuff. And so if you're an organization that's invested in the old thinking, right, you're definitely going to be left behind. So there's, at some point, you're going to have to kiss those sunk costs goodbye and just start thinking about the future. That's sort of hyperbolic, just to
No,
be.
you bring a very valid point. Like, the concept of store of the future has never been more important, and it needs to be something that you're investing in now. Many retailers thought about store of the future. Again, they thought it was something that was 5 or 10 years away. You should be thinking about the store of the future right now, and you should be executing on that strategy in short order.
We are so much closer to the future of work than we ever thought we would be 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been a fantastic conversation, Michael. So thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait for this one to be live, so folks can hear this story.
Thank you for inviting me, and it was a pleasure just dialoguing about the future of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a wonderful, happy holidays.
You too. Thank you.